Everyone, I'm Kira and I was doing a project that was funded by the Otago Regional Council. And in this project, I compared the Otago Regional Policy Statement and the Otago Regional Climate Strategy. And so to give you a bit of a background, Otago Regional Council is responsible for sustainably managing the resources in Otago. And this is a wee map of the Otago region, and obviously it's a lot bigger than just Dunedin. So moving on to the documents, a little bit of background about them. So the first is the regional policy statements, and these are a legislative framework that helps to guide what the Otago Regional Council can and can't do. So it's guided by higher order planning documents such as the Treaty of Waitangi and the Resource Management Act. And it's also influenced by other documents such as national policy statements and environmental standards. So the regional policy statements directly guide what is in the regional and district plans of the council. And specifically for the Otago region, the 2019 regional policy statement is the one that's currently in effect. However, there's also another version, the 2021 one, and this has a couple.
Oh, okay.
No, this has a couple of amendments in it and is a newer version. And because there were these two versions, I analysed both in my analysis. And so what actually is in the regional policy statement? So it guides the management of resources in the Otago region. So things like the air, the coastal environment, and land and freshwater. So the second document that I had was the climate strategy. And this is a series of 10-year goals, and it outlines 9 goals. And it's focused on how the Regional Council could contribute to mitigating and adapting to the effects of climate change. So it comes from another document called the Strategic Directions, and this has a series of 10-year goals. And this was written by the 12 councillors of the region and is guided by mana whenua input. Yeah, so both the climate strategy and the strategic directions work towards guiding the regional council towards this overall vision, so that our environment and communities are healthy and connected from the mountains to the sea. So in the strategic directions, there's also these 2 comprehensive goals, and this is about partnership with mana whenua and also community engagement. And these are factors that are upheld throughout the entire strategy. So for my project, I compared these 2 documents, and the aim of this was to help inform the strategy team of the Regional Council to where their efforts should be focused in supporting the Regional Council to better align its functions towards the strategic directions, and more specifically towards this vision. So I'll just go through what I did and yeah. So I compared the regional policy statements, so both the 2019 and 2021 statements, against the climate strategy. And with these, I analysed the depth of alignment between them. And I did this through rating them from being strongly aligned to not aligned. There was also the section of not relevant, and this was when a key concept or idea of a goal did not relate or was not mentioned in the regional policy statement. And this is a wee summary diagram of the overall findings. And as you can see here, a lot of the goals had varying degrees of alignment. Some were really strongly aligned, while others weren't as much. And I don't really have time to talk about them all today, so I'll just go into a couple just to get a gist of like what I did. So one of the goals was goal 4, and this was the goal that a regional policy statement and regional plans control development in areas that are vulnerable to natural hazards. So particularly relevant to the Otago region, this could be areas like the coastal environment that is susceptible to tsunamis and coastal erosion, and also areas like floodplains. So this looks really complicated, but this is the sort of table that I used to compare the analysis between the documents, and I'll just go through it step by step. So the 2021 regional policy statement, I divided it into 10 sections, and these corresponded with the domains and topics outlined in the statement. For the 2019 regional policy statement, it was structured a bit different, so I split it up into the 5 chapters as well as an implementation and method section. And I didn't include chapter 2 as this was outlining kaitahu relations, and this was covered by the partnership goal. So more specific to goal number 4, I really focused in on the hazards and risks sections. And this was because a number of the methods and policies really strongly aligned with the goal. And yeah, more specifically, method 3 was about natural hazard risk reduction methods. Policy 10 was about coastal hazards. And objective 2 was about overall adapting to the effects of natural hazards. And I guess most importantly, method 1 outlined that the Otago Regional Council is responsible for specifying objectives, policies and methods in regional plans for managing land subject to natural hazard risk. And so what I did next was for each one of these policies and methods, I compared it to what was in the climate strategy. And as you can see here, what was in the regional policy statement really strongly aligned with what was in the climate strategy, and almost word for word, they conveyed the same meaning. So I judged that these were strongly aligned. And I did the same thing with the 2019 regional policy statement and found that an area in section C of the implementation and methods was really strongly aligned. And again, this said a similar thing about controlling development. However, there was a little bit of a different wording as the areas subject to natural hazard risks were outlined as being the beds of rivers, lakes and wetlands in the coastal marine area. So I again compared the two and judged that they essentially conveyed the same meaning and that they were strongly aligned. And the next step, I sort of delved into a bit of why this might be the case. And I found that there was a section in the Resource Management Act. So as a bit of background again, the Resource Management Act is something that guides the regional policy statements. And there was a section in the Resource Management Act that there had to be a section in regional policy statements that controlled these areas. And this was the reason why they were so strongly aligned. So as a bit of a summary, this goal and policy were really strongly aligned with one another, and this was because it fulfills a requirement in the RMA, which was outlined in each of the regional policy statements. And moving on to another goal, this was the goal that active transport is the preferred mode for short journeys in urban areas. And as a little bit of background, active transport is any forms of transport that involve physical exercise, so things like cycling and walking. And I repeated the same process for this goal, and I found specifically in the energy, infrastructure and transport section that there was a goal policy that was partially aligned. And more into depth of this, it suggested that a high priority should be placed on active transport and its integration in the transport system. So I also found a similar policy in the 2019 regional policy statement. And this again suggested that a high priority should be placed on active transport. And though that these were mentioned, as you can see by this document, there's not a whole lot of mention about active transport in either of the regional policy statements. And additionally, I said that they were partially aligned as the roles of regional transport plans did not include active transport. Instead, other focus areas were mentioned, such as public transport and other things. And additionally, they were referred to as being the role of territorial authorities. So the likes of the city and district councils rather than the regional council itself. And because of this partial alignment, I suggested that to help achieve this goal under what was said in the regional policy statements, the regional council could focus instead on supporting these territorial authorities in achieving this goal. And I repeated the same process for each one of the 8 goals and investigated the meaning behind each one. I then suggested improvements to help better align the strategy and policy. And as you can see here, again, different ones had different levels of alignment. And so some were less straightforward than the 2 that I've mentioned. But yeah, that's it. Yeah, thank you guys for listening.
So thank you, Raj. Before you disappear out of camera, some opportunity for questions. Could probably pass to our ORC representative for first question. If you want.
I think I have any.
Yeah.
Kara's been really good at communicating and really clear this entire time. So I think it's really well covered. Thank you.
How about from the others?
Were there any other areas that were quite poorly aligned that would be bigger things to work on?
I wouldn't say like poorly aligned. It was just like less aligned than the other ones. But for example, there was another goal about agriculture and horticulture systems, and these weren't really mentioned in the regional policy statement. So yeah, there were like a few other gaps, but yeah, nothing that was like really, really misaligned.
Does the fix just to write the stuff back into the policy statement?
Yeah, so I guess the amendments, the suggestions for like aligning the policy and the strategy were like ranged between making amendments to future regional policy statements or altering the goals to better fit with what is like okay under legislation, I guess. Yeah, just that sort of.
I've got a question for you. The content of this wasn't necessarily a big match to your area of study.
Yeah. Yeah.
So how did it feel about, you were applying things learned in another area and skills in another area to this? How did that work out for you?
Yeah, it was quite different than what I usually do. Like I usually am very science based, and a lot of the policies and stuff were very, I guess, up for interpretation a little bit. So I sort of tried to structure it as much as I could. But yeah, again, sort of very different. Yeah.
And is there anything from that difference that you take back into your further study?
Yeah, I think definitely. Yeah, I think it was really helpful talking to the people at ORC as well and like learning deeper about those policies. Yeah.
Not a question, but comment.
Yeah.
It was so good how you explained like how everything went together at the start. I love those slides because I feel like I've asked you lots of questions throughout the whole summer. And that now it's like, oh, I like understand the whole process. I thought you explained it really well.
Put on. Yep, so I'm taking the first slot. That's always a hard one. So next up. You've got so many apps open here. Repairs. Shoot. That's the right button should work. Don't have to send me coded messages.
Cool. Tēnā koutou everyone, my name is Brooke, and I've been incredibly lucky to be conducting a summer research summership with the management department, and then to also be able to come in and work alongside you guys here in the sustainability office. So my project was on exploring the repair work in Ōtepoti. So essentially that was looking at all of the particularly community-based repair organisations within Dunedin and just having really a chat with them and seeing where they're at and taking sort of a scope of what's happening in the community. particularly as we sort of look to move towards a more circular economy and how repair plays a part in this. Yeah, so a circular economy is a system designed to keep materials in use for as long as possible by slowing down, closing and narrowing material and energy loops. So this can be done through like long-lasting design, repair, recycling, maintenance, and really just keeping things in the loop rather than bringing new things into it and creating waste to come out of it, really. And repair is a really big part of this. It keeps materials and things in use for longer. Rather than turning it into waste or having to recycle it, we can use the stuff we have and not extract more stuff that we might not need. Yeah, so repair extends the use life of items, as I said. But I think something that really stuck out to me in particular through this research and looking through the literature is how much repair is more than just taking materials and fixing things. There's so much community in repair, a lot of intergenerational relationship building as skills are passed down to people, particularly in these community organisations. The act of bringing something in and sitting in a room with people and having discussions over fixing things, I think really is just another aspect of repair that maybe, I don't know, I found particularly interesting. And then also talking about economic equity, a lot of the times these organisations will take something that's maybe broken or that someone doesn't want anymore and redistribute it to other people in the community, often for free or for a small donation. And so that means that some things are more accessible to people that might not have been able to be otherwise. And sometimes that just means that people are getting better quality items than they would if they were going and buying stuff new. Yeah, so repair is a key pillar of the circular economy, and I think as we try and move towards a more circular economy, be more sustainable in the way we operate, it is a big part of that transition. So there are lots of initiatives in the country, such as the Consumer Guarantees Amendment Bill, and essentially that is passing through Parliament at the moment. I think it's just gone through its first reading, and it's trying to necessitate that repair is more accessible in terms of accessing parts, accessing like manuals and just knowing about the objects that you have so it's easier to repair, and sort of trying to phase out things like planned obsolescence, stuff that isn't made to be repaired. And also there are organisations working across the country on repair, particularly an organisation that had a big part of my project was Repair Cafe Aotearoa, and they essentially bring people together in a workshop style repair cafe where people get together maybe one afternoon a month in a community hall, and they have all these different types of repair and people bring in what they need, and it builds a real community, but also people can come and get things fixed. Yeah, and so that was a huge element of my research. But whilst like organisations like Repair Cafe operate in most major cities around the country, they don't have a presence on the ground in terms of running a workshop. So what's really unique about Dunedin is it is more lots of organisations with really particular types of repair or working together in like a network. So yeah, you'll have different types of repair organisations repairing one or a small group of specific items instead of one organisation that brings people together. Yeah, and as the Dunedin City Council's draft of the waste minimisation plan is undergoing consultation, there is lots of discussion there about supporting community groups, about supporting repair, and so that's just really timely alongside my research as well. So my research really was trying to assess the unique repair network that Ōtepoti has and provide insights into how it can be better supported, identify barriers and enablers. Yeah, and so there's two questions here that we were focusing on. The method, most of our participants were found through word of mouth. Dunedin's a really small place, so most of these organisations either know each other or have heard of each other. And whilst there was also sort of an online research aspect of trying to find who would be best to talk to, a lot of the times people sort of knew, and so we could get names and sort of contact them from there. In total, there were 6 interviews that were conducted for the main data set and alongside some contextual interviews. So the barriers. There were four main barriers identified in this research. By far, the most prominent barrier was financial. A lot of organisations identified that, I guess, the economic plane of the country right now is sort of posing as a barrier. A lot of the times they're struggling to find funding, and also their operational costs are going up, and also people are now trying to access their services maybe more because they're trying to cut costs in their own life. So there's sort of this three-sided pressure on some of these organisations that they were sort of trying to find ways to work within. Alongside that workload, there was a couple different ways people sort of identified how workload was impacting the organisation. Some of it was the fact that their employees are working more hours than they can, that they can count, and they're working outside of their working hours just to cover the work they have. Some organisations said that they felt like they were having to extend their work outside of what they necessarily be liking to do because they need to meet the needs of the community. So how can I give something to someone if also we maybe need to support them if there's waste? So I can't give something to someone and then them just throw it out, so they need to help to bring it back to us, so then we don't deal with waste, and then we also deal with parts. And it's sort of expanding their scope a lot larger as they're trying to fill these gaps in the community. And then also distribution of workload within the organisation that tended to be having to shuffle around roles to cover gaps because there's so much work to be doing. Third is physical space and storage. So with repair, often comes a lot of equipment, comes a lot of spare parts that need to be held. Some organisations get donated stuff from the community and then fix it up. But while they have it, they have to hold it somewhere, and it is becoming quite a barrier for them to have even just the space for the stuff that they need, particularly if they want their location to be accessible. Because if they need to find a place that's big enough to hold everything they need, it might not necessarily be in a place that people from the community can access very easily. So it's trying to find the medium for that. Number 4 was engagement. So this wasn't something that all organisations identified, but some people felt like the time and effort that was required for the consumer to reach out to them and to go through the process of bringing something that's broken in to get fixed, and the time that took, people were feeling, the community is feeling more stressed, and so they're less willing maybe to do that now because they might not have the time or the energy to be putting into that. In terms of enablers, so this was things that the organisations identified that they either were doing or wanted to do to sort of mitigate those barriers and sort of move forward. The biggest one, and by far, I think, if you did a word cloud, the most commonly said word in every single interview was collaboration. Almost every single organisation cited some form of collaboration that they're doing with someone else in the community. That is sharing resources, even just sharing like staff or sharing discussions, and trying to find a way where they can sort of band together to sort of mitigate some of those other barriers. The second was fundraising. So with the biggest challenge being financial, fundraising then becomes a key part of some of these organisations' work. However, a lot of the people who discussed that it was something that they were working on said that it was taking up way more time than they'd like it to be. And that was something that they were also having to work through. And the last one is managing non-financial resources. So beyond securing more funding, it was redistributing what they already had, whether that be space, whether that be staff, and trying to fill the gaps when they couldn't find the funding to fill. So something that really struck out to me was the interconnected of a lot of these barriers and even some of the enablers. So if you're struggling financially, you might not be able to find a place with the right amount of storage to hold the things you need. And then you might struggle with engagement because you can't find a place that is accessible for people to find the stuff you need. And then if you're not getting the right engagement, you might be struggling financially because you're not having the numbers to sort of facilitate more financial funding or even like donations from the community. And that might be a lot of work to have to deal with all those barriers. So I think there was a lot of times where it was sort of getting into that loop and sort of discussing how they can sort of break from that really. Yeah, and another question that got asked during the research is what barriers to a circular economy that they saw just in the community or in their day-to-day work. some people identified that they thought that people weren't seeking out these services, or might not be the thing that they immediately think to do when something breaks. And they found, especially unless it was something that people held a lot of value with, it's just not something that they were seeking out. Second was accessibility. It often takes a lot of time and effort to reach out to an organisation, to find that they exist to begin with, and then to take your thing there to get it fixed. Something that stuck with me quite a lot was one participant said that they were like, a lot of these services run at the same time every week. If someone's working or they've got kids or something and they can't make that same time every week, then they're not ever going to be able to make it to these services and get it repaired. So they're just going to have to find another way to get around that. And finally, information and knowledge. Sometimes organisations felt that maybe people didn't know they were there, and maybe not aware of the available services for people to be able to get there. Yeah, so looking at that data, it was really looking at how these financial barriers could be overcome. A lot of these organisations that they thought that building on the current collaboration that they have was their best next step in what they felt that they were going to look into and to be supported in doing. And really their ultimate goal was to strengthen the circular economy to make it more accessible and to further that work. So yeah.
Questions?
How many like repair cafes? So the repair cafes, they have them in all different cities. I was looking at the ones just in Christchurch, and a lot of suburbs will have a repair cafe. So it really depends on how big the city is and how many they're initiating within their cities. Like I know Christchurch alone had like quite a long list because they had one in Kashmir, they had one here, and so a lot of the times it was people from the community who had these skills were coming together to run repair cafes. Yeah, so.
You mentioned that we don't have a repair cafe in Pūhau, so everything that's happening here is quite specific to particular types of goods.
Yeah.
Is there a certain type of good that there's a gap? Like what's the biggest low hanging fruit? Is it repairing TVs or microwaves? Did you sort of come across where the gaps might be in Dunedin?
Yeah, so there's lots of organisations doing, they sort of have their own niche. And whilst there were some that would maybe do like, there was always an example of the toaster, but there weren't many of the bigger established organisations that actually you could take your white to get repaired, stuff like that. A lot of the times it was, they were repairing high value goods in terms of like personal value, so like either like clothing or technology, stuff like that, but it was those day-to-day things that might other end up in landfill that was kind of yeah.
We've got a couple online, so just offering up if you want to ask a question, either unmute yourself or put something in the chat for us. So please ask up the questions at the end of each session. But while you might be tapping away, I've got a question for you. This is your second summer scholarship. Yeah. I'm interested in your experience of doing the second one. What was different? What had you learned from the first? So overall.
Yeah, I definitely think I drew quite a few similarities between even just the projects themselves. So both times I was sort of slotting myself into maybe there was already work and discussion in the community that had been done on the topic. And so it was a lot of similarities and going in and talking to people and coming through with that research there. But I definitely found it was like the ability to go and talk to people off-site this time was really cool. I was going to these organisations' bases and their offices, and that was all over Dunedin. I got to see more Dunedin, but also being able to go in and see the cool work was something that I took away. It's really valuable for me. But I definitely found that a lot of stuff I did last year like really helped me bring it.
Another round of applause. I missed some of Tim's chat messages. So for the first presentation, really interesting, especially given current climate policy. Yeah, really good. Thank you for this. So next up. Student engagement. Let's see if we can get this clicker work. What was camera there? So you come this way. Perfect. The left and right buttons.
Hi, I'm Trish. I've had the pleasure of working with Jess Teodika's student engagement coordinator over the summer to try and tackle measure engagement across the university, but through the case study of Teodika. So at first, this research sort of aimed to find a metric like measuring the student engagement. But what we found is that it was far more complicated than what we originally thought. Especially because when we looked at the university's vision for engagement, they very much wanted students to have this sort of holistic experience where they felt connected. There's a series of graduate attributes that sort of say what they want students, who they want students to be when they leave Otago. They want them to be more socially responsible, and they want to feel connected and look back on their time with fond memories that extend more than just academics. So this is where the challenge kind of arises, because the university tends to overemphasize the importance of actually finding a metric number despite having these holistic ideas. But yeah, so in order for students to actually engage with this vision and have these graduate attributes, they need to actually be actively involved. We can track numbers, we can track social media insights, but that doesn't really show the extent of which students are actually engaging, which is why metrics are just unreliable. So with this, and sort of knowing pretty early on that finding a metric was maybe not the most suitable idea, we configured these aims and objectives. The first was to review current student engagement strategies and their effectiveness in enriching the student experience beyond academics, and to identify what works and what doesn't in designing and delivering engagement initiatives while using stakeholder insights. But ultimately, the study aims to produce actual strategies to improve student engagement, bringing Teodika and the university closer to this inspired vision. So just a quick rundown of our methods. We had 6 stakeholder participants. All of these stakeholders, their direct role was to be engagement coordinators across varying institutions. And then for our students, student surveys, which we had 50% participants, this was just a really quick one. I think it was maybe about 6 minutes to complete the entire thing. And then Instagram polls, they were just like Instagram stories like this and that, really quick, and that got much more engagement with 120 participants. It is important to note that we only really sought the opinion of students that were already involved with Teodika, either through the Instagram or the mailing list. This was not a larger commentary on sustainability, it was just Teodika. So while talking to key stakeholders, we sort of discovered very early on that there are a multitude of challenges, which, even though the idea was to use Teodika as a case study to find out what engagement works best for Teodika, it sort of became this idea that maybe we should create a documented well that is validating the struggles of stakeholders who work at student engagement. And the main thing that came up every time was this tension between event numbers and fostering genuine engagement. So this idea that proving that an institution is worthwhile, that it needs funding and that it should be here, having to produce those numbers and give them back to higher people at the university, even though that may not actually mean anything in terms of engagement or what the institution seeks to do. An example of this would be with Teodika. It doesn't matter how many numbers you have, if the goal is to create more sustainably minded students, there's no way of measuring that student actually becoming, having those attributes after coming to events. And yeah, just this idea that students, stakeholders feel pressured to justify funding through quantifiable metrics rather than just student engagement. And
And yeah, what was kind of disappointing to see is 50% of our stakeholders actually felt like they sort of took on the sort of numbers game as well. And they sort of just felt judged by numbers, even if the event felt really good when people were there, people were really engaged. If they got low numbers, it kind of felt like a failure, even if it wasn't, which sort of leads to these ideas of like job dissatisfaction as well within stakeholders. Leading on from this, yeah, just to disconnect with university goals, this misalignment between values and resource allocations. So having this vision going back to like creating more socially responsible students, and the university saying, yes, we want this out of our graduates, and yet the funding isn't there to be able to host events to create those type of students or to have those students' experiences. And yeah, just the numbers game versus meaningful engagement. Yeah, low event turnout was equated to failure for a lot of stakeholders, and this idea that like having to put your all into creating events that was supposed to be captivating for students and then having low turnout. A lot of stakeholders, especially this quote down here, sort of said that like there's so much I can put my all and my creative vision into an event to have it be failed by the university, and having to keep creating and keep putting stuff out that may be seen as a failure as well, kind of just can be quite demotivating. One of the main struggles is just the sheer unpredictability of engagement. At various semester for different courses as well. A course that might have a really high workload, might be another one's chill one, so it's hard to find a time of year that suits everyone. And this idea as well that it just kind of fluctuates as well when it comes to students, people who are in first year might be really organised with their halls. Second year, you're kind of getting into it. Third year, yeah, and then fourth year, you might just want to be disconnected altogether because you're kind of getting over it. So it's hard to sort of be like, well, where should we focus our attention? What level is good to sort of be like, oh, we'll focus on second and third years because we know they like to engage, but that is still hard year to year as well. Yeah, and student preferences evolving rapidly, making long-term engagement strategies difficult to sustain. Stakeholders noted that communication methods that were once highly effective, like TikTok or mailing lists, worked really well last year, and now this year people just want Instagram. And just shifts in aesthetic trends. Yeah, just sort of this idea that because you work in student engagement, you have to sort of kind of figure out what students want. And then because the preferences of students, the aesthetic trends, what they want to see is evolving so quickly, the jobs of stakeholders have to change as well. Many people sort of talked about like, yeah, my job is student engagement, but I have to also be a whiz when it comes to like graphic design because I have to produce stuff that looks good to students they want to involve with. I've got to be a social media marketer as well. And sort of just having this role just being expanded year on year on year and having to change without really much notice and sort of a lot of trial and error. So from stakeholder interviews, we also asked people like, okay, if you host an event, what do you do to ensure that it does well every time, or what was something you tried and maybe it was a failure? So sort of produce this idea of what works and what doesn't. So what doesn't work isn't like a fit purpose. So sort of just this idea of like telling students when and where something was happening didn't really work. Students have limited time and limited energy. They want to know that when they go to an event, what do they seek to gain and what do they seek to learn, what experience will they have, rather than just we're doing this at this time. And that transactional approach, yeah, sort of getting students to kind of come to prove that your institution is doing something rather than connecting it to your deeper meaning and what you can provide students and looking at what students can provide for you. Didn't work as well. Again, the overemphasis on numbers and generic communication. As a student, you see a lot of emails, you see a lot of social media posts. It's easy to just see something and not have it really capture you. So you've got to get a little bit more creative in trying to capture that student's eye. And then, yeah, placing quality over quantity. Sometimes boutique events, smaller events are just better. Sometimes that's what students want. But again, with that numbers game, sort of like, well, we have to have these like sort of bigger booming events, even if that may not be what's best for engagement, didn't work as well. But what did work was, yeah, that clear purpose, really communicating the why of your events and the meaning. Food as well, very important for students.
It's a great incentive that addresses a need of food insecurity, and that sort of teaching as well about connection and communication. The social element, pretty much events need to have some sort of social element. If they're just purely informative, they don't tend to do it as well. And then student input, so utilising student volunteers and student representatives to create events by students for students, and then just a focus beyond numbers and how people feel. So going on to our case study, what does student engagement success look like for Te Otaka? So Te Otaka defines successful student engagement as a student who experiences a sense of belonging from the community and actually participates in sustainable initiatives. The engagement is reflected in the willingness to utilise and access Te Otaka's resources, leading to a transformative student experience, fosters a deeper understanding of sustainability. The success is achieved when Te Otaka positively influences student experiences, encouraging them to adopt sustainably conscious habits and take advantage of opportunities to contribute to environmental initiatives. So just creating more sustainably minded students is kind of the overall goal, and making sustainable just a bit more accessible, maybe like a one-stop shop to be able to do those things. So if we kind of look at Te Otaka's overall engagement, it's actually really positive. A lot of people identify themselves as somewhat engaged, which is really great, although this is kind of down to whatever the student like, you know, but this was like a general question of how engaged do you think you are, and that's up to the student as well. My perception of it, like me being very engaged, might be someone's perception of them not being so engaged, so it's kind of hard to know, and it was very much up to the student. But again, if people feel engaged, then they obviously feel connected, so that's really positive. How students prefer to engage. So 43% of students prefer active participation, while 57% prefer to stay informed. A lot of people just want kind of casual social events. They can just show up and enjoy it instead of just having to like psych themselves up for a big event where more is required of them. And there is a preference for social events over informative. That is from both of our Australian polls and our survey, also reflected in the stakeholder insights as well. And just as like quite an even split between focusing on community aspects and building their own personal skills. So here are all the key motivations. So people wanted convenient event times and locations, and clear communication and hands-on involvement opportunities were kind of the main ones there. People just wanted like new exciting things to happen. And you're also wanting ways to slow down as well, which is quite split. So goes to show that you kind of need a varying degree of events to keep people excited and coming. These are the popular initiatives, which was quite interesting. Bike repair workshops, op shops, and drop for good. These most popular events provide students with something. The good thing about Te Otaka is I think that a lot of their events they actually already have that social aspect as well. If you come, then you're probably going to gain a skill and meet people and teach people as well. But it kind of just goes to show that, I don't know, in a way sort of transactional, I guess, like you're filling a student need with the op shop and the bike repair and the drop for good, you're providing students with something that they do need to kind of keep them coming. Is important to note and honestly accepted. And we asked students what they thought like was most beneficial to them. So the op shop again very high, drop for good, and the refill stations and bike repairs again easy sustainability that they can get on campus was really beneficial. This was quite interesting, influencing perception and sustainability, going back to the sort of university's vision of creating socially responsible students, wanting to make sure that Te Otaka is actually creating more sustainable people. And this was actually really positive. It shows that most students thought that the sustainable initiatives here were great, which is really cool. But what I'm most excited about is that figure there about sustainable behaviour. So asking students like, what have you learned from Te Otaka that you've carried out in your daily life? And 77.3% reported that they have implemented some sort of sustainable habit beyond campus, so at home. A lot of which is reflected in the op shop and drop for good and bike repairs was to do with like a circular economy. Just greater value in it, contributing to it, thinking more and thinking twice about maybe throwing something out or buying a new item. Environmental mindfulness. Yeah, just being more empathetic towards the environment through a number of different initiatives is incredibly important. And then waste reduction, so a lot of composting and donating and repairing, which is kind of the circular economy as well. A lot of commentary about food waste and people sort of like initiating that off campus. A lot of comments on our survey actually said that people were bringing in their food scraps to put in the compost on campus, which was pretty cool. So yeah, contributions to the student experience. So yeah, like I said, with engagement, it kind of means nothing for it to have a metric unless it's reflected in the student experience, which is what our main concern is here. So it was kind of like a median number. We asked people on a scale of 0, it has had, Te has had no influence on my student experience, and then 100 being like, yes, it's got a very strong influence. About 55%, so, you know, moderate. It's there, it's helping people, which is, it's still positive, but there's still room for improvement. 90% feel engaged or connected to others or the initiatives that Te was trying to get across when they were in the Te space or events, which is really positive. It shows good engagement. And then 26% strongly agree that the interaction is deeply connected to the environment. And 48% somewhat agree, which is obviously quite positive as well. So going back to one of my aims, trying to create an actionable plan for measuring student engagement. Trying to find a metric, obviously it's not going to work, and I honestly don't think it's going to be that helpful. So this is what we've got instead. This is the student slice. It is a recipe for engagement that is applicable across a number of different institutions throughout the university, not just Te Oreke. It is based on Te Oreke, it is informed by stakeholders, but it's meant to be adaptable and flexible. So yeah, I'll go into it a little bit more step by step. So this is the base for events. This is what we need to have good student engagement or to make sure that something is positive for the student experience. So at our base, we have purposeful messaging, clearly communicating why the event matters to students, student input involving student reps for relevant and resonant event design, and personalized communication using direct, but custom communication, personalized communication. I think what I mean by that is more just finding out your sort of niche group and who wants to use your institution and communicating to them rather than just the masses. And that's kind of why the case study sort of focused on Te Oreke and wanted to get the insights from people who are already involved, because it's like, well, you're involved, how can we keep you involved and how can we keep you engaged? Which I think is important. Just trying to focus on who you've got and make sure that they're happy and coming back and getting involved. And social connection, again, all events should have that little bit of social aspect involved to really create that sort of engagement and that sense of belonging. And then add-ins are just things that sort of help boost engagement a little bit more. Food, as we've said, it's crazy how important food is for like all coordinators. I do recognise the struggle. Obviously, student engagement is so unpredictable. How much food are you going to get? How do you make sure there's not any wastage? But it seriously is a really good aspect for communication and just connection among people who are at the event. And then micro engagements, just finding ways that students can just have sort of quick and low effort involvement instead of having big events all the time. They're just ways that people can just sort of casually get involved. I think that's why the op shop has been so good for people and so beneficial for people, because they can just pop in, like they don't have to go on a certain time, they don't have to book it in their calendar, it's just there, which is really great. And then follow-up sweeteners, so just kind of even just sending out like a sort of mass email and be like, thanks for coming, sort of trying to keep people involved and recognise that they're beneficial to you and like what you can get to stay. And then seamless engagement, this is more to do with Te Oreke. A lot of commentary we got is about how Te Oreke tends to just like involve people who are already sustainably minded. Seamless engagement, I think, is just ways to kind of make people more sustainable without them even realizing. Going through like a review of like, you'll save money, or this is more convenient. like how we don't have disposable coffee cups on campus. I think that's a really great example of students' engagement, and I think that it involves people in the initiatives that Te Oroko is trying to convey without them even realising, which I think is really important for that sort of student experience. So I kind of went a little bit crazy on my whole pizza recipe analogy, so I'm sorry about that. The objective is to build anticipation, ensure relevance, and set the stage for meaningful engagement. This is our kitchen prep stage before the events or anything gets communicated what we need to do. Preheat the community with targeted communication. So social media platforms and student reps tailor messaging to meet the students' needs and values. Infuse with clear purpose, clearly communicate the event's purpose and value, make it relatable and relevant, and address the why students should care and why they should be here. And mix in student input and co-creation. Again, having the student reps, they should be involved in that process. If you want to create events that are for students, then they should really have that say. And marinate in excitement with micro engagements, even just like small little touch-ups on your story. Yeah, just sort of like, instead of just having like one poster that you put like, oh yeah, we put that here. Just like remind people of it, you know, keep the excitement of it, especially if it is a big event. Bringing up a successful event. The objective here is to create memorable experiences and meaningful connections. So host, don't just hold. I think this is really important. Instead of just sort of hosting, like holding an event and having that sort of transactional approach of how many numbers can we get. If you're hosting it, then you as the host, you're involved, you're there making sure people are having a good time. And I think that sort of creates a very sort of welcoming environment. We've got, well, it's not on there, but we've got micro engagements during the event. This is important for feedback as well. I think just sort of touching base with people and just connecting them like, hey, what do you feel about this? How should we change this? Whatever can actually be a good way to sort of inform more events instead of just having something sort of daunting and big like a survey. Blend social and informative elements. You want people to learn something, you want people to take away something from the events, but you also want to be social and have that sense of belonging too. And yeah, student engagements as well. And just integrating like effortless ways to be sustainable into events or to get involved into events, not making it too direct. And then the dessert. So we've got, personalized follow-ups, not incredibly personal, just making sure that you're connecting with people who have come, who've already come, and sort of get them back. I think it's more important to sort of focus on who does come and have them come back. Gathering feedback and continuing the conversation. What do people enjoy? What do they not? Implementing that and just kind of having this ever-changing aspect, especially because student purposes change so quickly. That's really important. And maintain community connection. Focus on building a connection rather than just holding once-off events. What we do to get people like sort of slowly involved, which can be done through social media as well. So to conclude, reviewed traditional metrics like attendance and session and measuring engagement, and we've effectively focused on administrative student-centered initiatives that go beyond academic enrichment. We've identified purpose-driven student-led initiatives that build community connection and resonate best for students. We've identified what works and what doesn't, both on the student side and the stakeholder side. We know what we shouldn't be doing, what we should be doing. And we've produced an adaptable recipe that is designed to guide stakeholders on effectively engaging students in meaningful ways and moving beyond metrics.
Awesome. Thank you very much. Any questions or online?
When you said following up with people after the events, do you collect the emails at the events, system of emails, or how do you do that?
I think just like even having, I think it's like some events that I've gone to having like QR codes that just like direct people to your socials and stuff. And then sort of having like, maybe even just like Instagram polls of like, what did you enjoy about, like, did you go to this event? What did you enjoy? What did you not? I don't think emails really work all that well, but yeah, I think just like directing people to socials and like easy ways they can get involved.
Nice.
Tim, you're on screen now if you've got a question to ask.
Oh, thank you. Hey, fantastic presentation. You're definitely speaking my language there. There's no doubting that. I've just got a couple of questions, and I've made some notes myself here. What do you think is the most successful way to reach the student body, and how do you maintain that connection with them?
Honestly, I think that to engage with students, it needs to be like as easy as possible. I think that's something I learned very quickly with even trying to gain student input. Our survey actually did have an incentive. It was pushed through emails and through posts, but in the end, it didn't do as well as the quicker option. So I think just recognizing that students have limited time and energy, and when you're trying to think of like as a student, like how much effort you can give to go into events, I think whatever is like most simple and most easy to get involved will be, yeah, like a lot of comments were kind of like, oh, I'd love to just have like a coffee and sip type of thing. Like I'd love to be able to just occasionally sort of pop in. I think events, big events are great, but ultimately a focus on small engagements and how you can get people just a little bit involved, like every so often, will keep your institution in a student's mind and keep them involved and like a little bit engaged. I think that's like almost better than nothing.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. Thank you.
I've got a question about some of the statistics. So I remember there was one in particular that was at 78. Yeah, that's 77%. Where did that come from? Was it the survey or the Instagram poll or an aggregate of it? How many people it represents?
It represents 50 people. Yeah, that is from our survey, because it was kind of, we had like a few options and then we had like another section because the extent of which like habits there are, yeah, needed sort of required like a typed answer, yeah, which we didn't fit with the sort of quick nature of like one or the other. Yeah. Yes, that's what I did. Yeah.
That's still good.
Yeah, it's still great. Yeah, really positive stats actually overall in a lot of areas. Yeah.
Just this might not come out as a fully formed question, but I'm just drawing a connection between what Brooke was saying about the barriers and one of those being space, and then the affordance of having the space, Te Raka, and having a space that was sort of at the very edges of campus and now moving onto campus. So do you think your data reflects the snapshot? So it was over the summer, people have had 2 semesters of Te Raka being on campus. Yeah, do you think that data reflects a very sort of point in time, or if we were to ask in another 12 months' time, how do you think things would vary?
I think because we went to the revenues of people who are already involved, I would usually guess that they like are involved with what's there. I think that in order to sort of gain that insight in 12 months' time, it might need to extend further than just who was already involved. I expect that if they are on the social media or mailing list, they'll probably been to the new location. But yeah, actually commentary as well on just like the ease of access and just the relief of having like a one-stop shop for sustainability. And having that closer would definitely help with that.
I saw you present on another research topic in one of your geography papers, which is kind of like a group summer scholarship type task. Yeah, really keen to hear the differences and the developments and your reflections on having done that and then having done it. Not about the contents of them, but you and the process.
The process of like going from a group to a solo, or just
That's a good part of it.
I think that was my first research, and I think that was good to sort of like a lot of things were much more familiar this time around. I'd done ethics approval before, I'd done interviews and survey creation before. So I definitely think the whole process of doing it was much more straightforward. I think that this project actually probably could have benefited from a little bit more collaboration that would come with a group setting. bounce some ideas off people. Probably my preferred method of research. So I think it was interesting doing like a solo work as well, especially because Jess, who is the student engagement coordinator, so busy this time of year. So yeah, I don't think that answers your question, but yeah, improved in some ways because of the experience, and I think it could have been some aspects of that research could have been beneficial. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you guys.
So,